Hello, everybody. Welcome to Astrology Unplugged. I'm Rick DiClemente. Tonight we'll be talking about Saturn. I believe it's episode 283. I'm still trying to figure out who I want as a special guest on episode 300. Just not quite sure. Anyhow, I had the impulse very strongly this week to talk to you about Saturn. And it's very important that you understand what I'm going to tell you about Saturn, because Saturn is a really central planet. For the longest time, it was the outermost planet with the ring around it. It's the center of the planets now. You have the personal planets, and then you have Saturn and Jupiter, which are social planets. Then you have the outer planets. Saturn has really got a very bad reputation. It's very unfortunate. Saturn deserves some of the bad reputation. It certainly does. And it certainly does not in other ways. I want to try to clear that up for you. Put up with my hoarseness for me, if you would, please. So we're going to talk about two things about Saturn. We're going to talk about where Saturn is in your birth chart and where Saturn is now in relationship to where it started from. And more importantly, we're going to talk about Saturn going through the 12 houses. Okay? I'll see how I can mix that up for you. I'll be using this diagram to do most of the teaching. Okay. I don't see anybody. I don't even see myself. Okay. What we want to keep track of in the first part of this teaching is the diagram that's used throughout the book, Exquisite Zodiac, and it's the diagram in front of you. And I put a lot of effort into making this diagram to represent many different things. And first, what I want you to see is the quadrants. The quadrants are talked about in the book too. This quadrant, the first three houses of everybody's chart, Saturn goes through there in every 6, 7, 8 years. Because this is not always a right angle, it takes 6, 7, 8 years to go through this quadrant. This is the quadrant of substance, the stuff that you're made of. The next quadrant is the quadrant of putting the stuff together. You'll notice the bottom half of the zodiac is about the me half, and the top half is about the we half. When you get up above Libra, it's houses 7, 8, 9. These are the signs and the houses that have to do with relationships. And then the final quadrant has to do with the world and beyond. I'm not sure I'm going to try to do this again, but when I did that last time, there was nobody on the picture except for me. Now I got everybody. All right. All right. Now, what I'm going to go around the zodiac several different times because I want you to get the understanding. Okay. When Saturn spends 7 years, 6, 7, 8 years here, 6, 7, 8 years, 8 years here, 6, 7, 8 years here, 28 years to go around. Okay. Everybody's different because you're all born at different times. When Saturn, I want you to understand this real quickly, and then we're going to go over this again. Saturn starts new and fresh in the first house, starts rebuilding the self. It's rather empty. It's empty from its past revolution, and it starts to rebuild itself. And when Saturn gets to the bottom of the chart, it's a real big deal. Not only is it entering the fourth house, but it's a big deal because it's stopped going downward and starting to go upward. This is one big deal when Saturn hits the bottom of the chart. Okay? And as it starts up on the next 7, 8, 9 years in the second quadrant, it's about the personality all of a sudden knows what it wants to do. Very important. When Saturn hits the bottom of the chart, the new self is cooked. The new self can see the midheaven, and the new self can see where it wants to go and what it wants to accomplish. And its accomplishments are 14 years from now. And it will get there 14 years later. And this is one of those patterns that you talk to people and almost everybody says, yes, yes, yes. So Saturn starts anew with a new goal in mind. The goal has a lot to do with the nature of the sign that's at your midheaven. It takes 14 years to culminate there. And when it gets on top, it's usually real good. It's about your job. It's about being noticed, about getting promoted, about becoming public, put in the newspaper, etc. And Saturn usually shines real well when it's in the 10th and 11th house. Its natural home is the 10th house. So when it gets to the 10th and 11th house, it's usually very comfortable there. Now, very many things happen. Complete revolution happens when Saturn gets to the 12th house. When Saturn gets to the 12th house, it wants to leave the world. It wants to leave the whole time that it's been going through here. It doesn't want to go to work anymore. It doesn't want to look after the kids anymore. It doesn't want to play the games that it used to play. It wants to get detached, similar to Pisces in the 12th house. It wants to let go of things, detach itself, and in a lot of ways, it's a feeling of death. It's not death, but it's death of the old cycle. So you have the death and the emptying of the self. By the time Saturn gets here at the 12th house, first house, beginning, start, ending, the soul is usually, the personality usually feels empty. I don't know what to do, don't know where I've been, don't know where I'm going, and it's very normal to feel empty. And it's very normal for clients to come see astrologers when Saturn is right there, because you feel empty. One of the other things that happens is you start to work on your body. This is all about rebuilding the self. Rebuilding the self. This is called the period of obscurity. When Saturn goes through these 7, 8, 9 years, because you don't know who you are, you're rebuilding the self, rebuilding your viewpoint, rebuilding your body, rebuilding your money, rebuilding your self-worth, rebuilding your mind, etc., etc. You still don't know what you want to do. And all of a sudden, when Saturn hits the bottom, boom, very suddenly, you know what you want to do. And you know what you want to do, and the sign at the midheaven usually gives you a clue as to what you want to do. So these patterns, I'm going to be going over and over and over them with you because you'll start to understand them better. Now, in the natal chart, Saturn is typically representative of the father. The moon is representative of the mother. Hello, Shelby. There's my cat. I got the other one in New Jersey. He's black with green eyes. Okay. You got to be very careful with Saturn. You got to be very careful not to make up your mind and label it too quickly. Do not label it and what it's doing too quickly, especially if you're reading a chart for somebody. Be very careful about labeling it too quickly because it'll fool you. It has many different sides to it. Sometimes Saturn is the mother. If the mother in your family is the disciplinarian. Now, usually when Saturn is messed up and it's not very effective, it can symbolize that your father was distant. But when you see it retrograde and you see it in a critical part of the chart, you can be sure your father was not there. When it's retrograde and it's on the ascendant, it's on the descendant, it's on the sun, almost always the father was distant, either cold, he was out working all the time, he did not blend with you. And the way you find this out is by asking the client. Don't try to read a book and find the formula because it doesn't work. You just ask the client. And after a while, that's how you learn. That's how you learn how a planet approaching an angle might start to affect the next house when it's 2-3 degrees away. You don't just make it up. You ask the client. Some people who are numb don't feel much. Saturn has to go into the next house before they feel anything. Other people that are real sensitive, they pick up on Saturn when it's 5 degrees away before it enters the house. So remember, you got to understand what Saturn's trying to do. None of these planets are negative planets inside you. None of them. All of them have a negative side if they're not.
There he
Oh,
is.
there he is.
We can't hear you though. You're muted. You're muted, Rick.
You hear me now?
Yes.
I got disconnected. I don't know what happened. Whatever. Now, Saturn's job with its ring around it, its job, if you compare it juxtaposed to all the other planets, and they all are the same way, they all got their own job. Saturn's nature, and this took me a long time to figure, this took me over 30 years to figure this out. Saturn's job is to make sure. You'll hear all this stuff about it being negative and containing you and crippling
You
you,
froze again.
restricting you. Huh? What's that? Uh-oh. I've got a bad internet. Got a bad internet connection, I'm told. Okay now? Okay. But Saturn's job is to make sure that things get done. And I've had the longest arguments with Liza about this. Remember, she's an Aquarian, so she's ruled by Saturn and Uranus. And I'm a Capricorn, and I got a lot of Saturn and a lot of Aquarius myself. But I'm fighting like crazy with people that try to tell me that Saturn is limiting. And almost every astrologer in the world will tell you how Saturn is limiting. And I say there's a big difference between it being limiting and it making sure. Now, this is a really tough argument. But when I get you home and we got a bunch of groceries and we're going to make some pies, we're all going to do certain jobs and we're cutting up things and we're following instructions, is that limiting? Or is that making sure the pie gets cooked right? You see? So there's a real debate here, and I'll probably go to my grave arguing this point. I think it's very much Saturn trying to make sure, and it can become limiting. It can be if you're not careful with it. Now, you'll notice that one of the main words you'll see me always using, and Capricorns are always using, is the word careful. We tell people to be careful, not to be too careful. That's just the way Capricorns are. All right, now, for right now, let's just keep in mind, Saturn's trying to make sure that things get done. Now, this is similar, but yet different than Virgo, because Virgo is about fixing. Okay, very big difference. Fixing things. Well, they must be broken if you're going to fix it. And Saturn is making sure, did you get this done? Did you get that done? Did you get that done? Okay. So when Saturn enters the first house, almost always, about 80% of my clients will tell me that they're going to try to lose weight. They're going to try to work out more, get on the treadmill, et cetera, et cetera. Almost always the client does that, okay? It happened to me and it worked and I did start losing weight. So when Saturn goes into the first house, which is the house of the body, it also has to do with your perception of the world and how you think the world perceives you. That's why the ascendant is so hard to understand. The ascendant is how you see the world and how you think the world sees you. So your perception has a lot to do with the first house. Now, it's very common when Saturn is in the 12th house and it's going into the first house. It's very, very much like never land. Because you're done with the old world. You've spent 28 years with Saturn going through your 12 houses. I don't care what signs, I'm talking about your houses. So when it goes through your 28 years, you want to end it. It gets to the 12th house, you're tired of it. You're tired of building with those blocks. You're tired of coloring with the same paints. You want to let it go, let it die, put it out to pasture. And what we find in astrology is it's very important when Saturn goes through the 12th house, because are we learning by putting it to bed or not? Are we learning from the death of the old, the beginning of the new? And Americans have quite a tradition of not learning squat from their old pattern, and they start to enter the new and they can be very confused. So clients can come to you very, very confused when Saturn is in the first house, because they just don't know what to do. And they feel guilty when it's in the 12th house because they don't want to go to work anymore. They don't want to take care of the kids as much anymore. They don't feel obligated to their duties. Remember, Capricorns have two strong words: duty and responsibility. All Capricorns. All of them. I've never met one that didn't. That's a big statement. Duty and responsibility. As it starts to get through the first house, I know my internet connection is unstable. So let's get this thing stable. I'll send out some stable vibes here. We'll see what happens. Now, as Saturn gets near the second house, it spends about 28 months in each house, approximately, because everybody's houses are different sizes. About 28 months in each house. You will notice, as I've noticed in my later years in astrology, 28 months is a big deal. You notice how many relationships go 28 months, how the mamas and the papas were together for 28 months and then they died. You'll notice all kind of sub patterns, and it's a sub cycle of the 28 years of Saturn. It's also related to the 28 days of a month. So 28 months is a real big deal. 2 years plus 4 months is a real common time. If you see something starting to die in your life and it's 2 years old, or it's 2 years and 2 months old, it's real probable that it will die when it gets to the 28th month. So Saturn moves to the first house, and usually by the time Saturn gets to the first house, you're starting to feel better. You're starting to get yourself in shape again, and Saturn goes into the second house. Now, just like much of this old astrology, when it gets to the second house, people start worrying about their money. But what I found, the second house is about your money, but it's much more about your self-worth. Self-worth. Across the zodiac, my worth with other people. 8th house. Self, the bottom of the chart is the self. Top of the chart is self plus others. So when Saturn goes to the second, I've yet to see a person yet that wasn't busy repairing their self-worth when Saturn went to their second house. And it can be very, very good. And I'm telling you from experience that Saturn can be a very, very good planet for you. And oftentimes is. And it's more likely that Saturn is good and bad at the same time. That's kind of like the way it is. Saturn is very common when Saturn's on you that you get new responsibilities dumped on your shoulders, You get tougher situations to work out. You have to work longer hours, et cetera, et cetera. Man, you wouldn't believe how many times Sagittarians come to me. And I laugh because they'll say to me, I don't know what's going on. And I'll say, you don't? I don't know what's going on. And I know right away they're talking about Saturn. I haven't even looked at their chart. When Saturn hits anything in the Sagittarius chart, oh my God, I got to work. Oh my God, I got to work hard for this. I got to sweat and work hard for this. And they're just not made to take a Saturn transit. And they're going to get a lot better off if they do. And a lot of them do have problems with responsibility. But it's just some Sagittarians, it depends on their chart. Some Sagittarians, when Saturn hits them, it's just so non-Sagittarian. Saturn is keep your nose to the grindstone till you get it done. Sag is, oh, I felt my nose touch that grindstone. Get that grindstone out of here. It's no fun. So they're really different kinds of energies. Now, when Saturn moves on, I'm going to be giving you lots of details about Saturn. There's no way it can be done in a linear fashion. When Saturn moves into the third house, the period of obscurity is coming to end. The period of obscurity is very much like you see an actor and he's disappeared for a long time. All of a sudden he's back on the screen. He looks renewed or she looks renewed. You say, where's that guy been? They've been through the 7 years of Saturn going through the period of obscurity. You can even use this to declare what their rising sign is without even knowing. When Saturn goes into the first house is when they disappear. And then they disappear and it's tough and they disappear because they really don't know what they want to do or who they are. And then they start to rebuild. Well, when Saturn gets to the final house of the first quadrant, they start to rebuild their mind. They start to reprogram themselves. They might even take classes to get better mentally. They might even start studying things mentally. But it's a real big deal when Saturn gets done with this quadrant and it hits this spot. And I mean the day it hits that spot. It's a big deal. Now, we're going to talk about why. First of all, it's at the bottom of the chart. Now it's going to start, it's been coming down for 14 years. Now it's going to start back up for 14 years. When Saturn hits there, usually, unless you've messed up, you look at the sign at the midheaven, and that tells you what, I got this new goal in mind. I know now what I want to do. Now, for instance, this is really intriguing, and this stuff works. Say your sign at the top of your zodiac is Leo. Saturn gets to the bottom of the chart. And say it hit there when you were 14, or you were relatively young. Well, you knew what you wanted to do. You wanted to be creative. Maybe you wanted to be an artist. And 14 years later, you do all your work. Saturn comes to the top of the chart. It culminates, comes into fruition. You get your job as an artist or an art teacher. Well, 28 years later, when Saturn gets back to the bottom again, what's very common is you want to be an artist again, but it's at a higher octave. Very, very common. This person wants to be in charge of an art committee or open an art store. It's the same energy, but at a higher dimension. Okay. We're going to go round and round the chart many times until you get the idea, because it's really important that you do. And this does not work with any other planet. Doesn't. Saturn is your everyday planet. Get up, go to the store, get a job. Where are you living? How you feeling? It's just your everyday planet. It doesn't have anything to do with far out stuff, transitions, spirituality, death and rebirth. Saturn is maintaining this incarnation. That's what Saturn is doing. It is the part of you that wants this incarnation to work. Now I have to study because I've been studying a long time. Still I'm learning. Is it maintaining this incarnation so that you stay glued to your original mission? I don't know. These are questions that are hard, but that's what Saturn does. All right. As Saturn gets across the fourth house, one of the things that's so unbelievably common, you got to quit your job in San Francisco and return home to New York to take care of your dying mom and dad. Unbelievably common. Or you hated your mom and dad, they're dying, you let them die and you don't go. It's a karmic point. The bottom of the chart is very karmic. Saturn is a very karmic planet. That's why I told you when we started, when you learn about the planets, things you will know, things that blink, which you're not sure of, you got to kind of figure it out, things that you'll never know, and things that are karmic. Karmic things are Saturnian, Plutonian, 8th house, 12th house. It is unbelievable how many clients I've had that all of a sudden they have to quit their job, go across country, spend a couple years nursing mom and dad until they pass away. Then they get to do the nursing through of all of the money and the escrow accounts and take care of all that stuff. The executor of the will. So Saturn in the fourth house being the family, the property, the house, a lot of that stuff is very common that those issues really get sky high when Saturn gets to the fourth house. Another thing that happens that I've seen so much, God, it's just amazing how many families are a mess. It really is just amazing. I mean, there are definitely families that get along real well, but there's a whole lot more that are just a mess. But you will see, it's so interesting to watch and learn and ask questions and learn. Then you get better because you got evidence. You're not guessing. Lillian. Lillian, that's Lillian. Lillian, there she is with the green-eyed lady. As Saturn traverses the fourth house, you want to do what? Making sure fourth house emotions, making sure fourth house family. You don't have to be a genius to figure it out. You want to make sure your emotions get fixed. You want to make sure that people in your family stop treating you like Ricky and they call you Rick. Real big deal. People get very touchy when Saturn goes through the fourth house. You don't want the family to keep shoving you back in the old role that they're comfortable with you being in. So Saturn, just like Saturn at the top of the zodiac, standing up in the world saying, this is my place in the world, Saturn at the fourth house stands up and says, this is how I will be known from now on in this family. You see, I keep teaching you so much about the bottom half of the chart is the self, and the top half is the self plus others. And I can't emphasize it enough. I know that Claudia's picking up on it real well, and I'm very happy about that. A lot of this was there, but it took formation as we wrote the book. And it became clear as we had to delineate between self-oriented, other-oriented. Okay? This cannot be said enough about how this is the me half, me and me. This is the we half. And I'm talking about the houses, which means we don't care what signs. It is confusing. So as Saturn goes through the fourth, what usually happens is the shakeup and new responsibility with the family. Sometimes the wills get redone. Usually the will gets rewritten when Saturn's in the 8th house. Sometimes it's in the 4th house. But it can be really some tough stuff when Saturn's in the 4th. He never liked me. Well, she never liked me. Well, dad was always, his favorite was always me. And, you know, it can be touchy stuff. So another thing that happens with Saturn in the 4th, and I just watched this happen with the Spiritualist Church in Pittsburgh, because I've kept an eye on them for a long time because I happen to have their birthday. And when Saturn hit the bottom of their chart fell apart. Pluto was there too. It fell apart. Why did it fall apart? You always ask yourself if Pluto's involved or something at the bottom of the chart about the foundation. And what happened is that church lost its way with its original contract, its original purpose. What do you call it?
Mission statement?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. They lost their way with their mission statement. They got some corrupt people in there trying to use the church and the presidency for power trips, and it all fell apart. They ended up moving. A Capricorn came in, took over, moved them into a mansion. They took over. I was reading for her, and what she was doing was building a new foundation. So you see, a lot of astrology very basically simple. If you got a messed up foundation, and that old one, the foundation was falling apart, the steps were falling off, the walls were falling down, the actual foundation starts to go. It's literal. Well, when you start to get Saturn traversing the 4th house or Pluto, you see efforts to build a new strong foundation with the rebar and the cement and the better mission statement, and you're on your way, because even though you know where you're going and you're starting to work at it, you know that all your work in the next 14 years are going to be piling weight on that. So your foundation has to be sure. So a lot of things happen when Saturn goes through the 4th house. A lot of things. Now, it goes into the 5th house, and usually it's not that big of a deal in the 16 houses compared to the cardinal houses. Things can happen with your children. They can happen with your creativity, with your joining an acting tribe, doing artistic work, etc., etc. But a lot of things happen with your children, since the 5th house is the house of children. Now, here's another one I've found that's really true almost all the time. When Saturn crosses right here into the 6th house, right there, as soon as it crosses, you start learning some new job skill set. Unbelievable. Why? You need a more practical skill. Not massage, not something far out, not Reiki, something like an MBA. Saturn going to the 6th house, you learn welding. So a job that's really down to earth, because you're getting to the last house now, the 6th house of the bottom 6. And just like Virgo is, nothing's pretty, nothing's dainty, everything's tough, no whining here. You're getting ready to enter the top half of the zodiac. That's why Virgo is such a big deal, because you're getting ready to put the first 6 houses to bed. No more excuses, no whining. We're getting ready to go meet people. Cinderella, 7th house. So when Saturn goes into the sixth, it's very common that you have health problems. That's a house of health. And the health problems will be all due to blockages. Stiffness, blockages. If you've been blocked or making sure too much leads to blockages. Making sure leads to not letting it breathe. One of the most common advices that you give to clients during Saturn times is to do yoga and to walk and to stretch. And Capricorns have lots and lots of problems with their knees. Number one problem is their knees. So stretching is metaphorical, you see. It's the opposite of making sure. It's allowing things to stretch, allowing things to be. So even though you're doing the Saturnian thing of making sure, you got to keep it counterbalanced with the other energies. So Saturn goes into the seventh. The whole time it's in that quadrant is very difficult because you got your new goal, but as Saturn's climbing these 7 to 8 years here, as it's climbing again, you go back through your life and write down the years that Saturn was here and here, and when Saturn was here and here and here, and you'll have your mind blown. Get you and get your family and your husband or whatever. Write down when Saturn was here, when they was here, when it crossed here, when it crossed here, and you're not going to believe how accurate this is. It's just unbelievable. This is one of the most true formulas in astrology. And the guy that is the real master of this early thinking was named Mark Robertson, M-A-R-C. Mark, he's dead now. Mark Robertson issued a lot of books in the 70s and 60s. They came out with a lot of this original thought. Okay, so as Saturn crosses into this line, this angle, it's always a big deal when it crosses any angle, because now it's into the seventh house. Now it's gone from me to we. This is a big deal. Now, this is where I've learned a couple of things. Not only have I learned the seventh house is not what I used to think about, but I've also learned that when it's going through the sixth house knows it. And the sixth house is preparing you for the seventh house. Why do you think Virgo's so busy ironing? They're ironing because you're going to be seen in public. You don't have any idea what it means to be seen in public. Cinderella's never been out of the damn kitchen, so she got everything shiny and got her teeth whitened and got her hair done because you're going to go meet people. And that is the reason that Libras are so uptight about being social. You just got here. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going on. It's too new. Just like Cancer doesn't know what's going on emotionally when they get thrown in the ocean, they can't swim. When you cross the cardinal barriers, the angles, it's a big deal. So when you cross it to the seventh, for years and years, and even now, that's all you hear about. Seventh house, seventh house, seventh house. Married, divorce, married, divorce, married, divorce. It's a bunch of crap. I mean, there's no doubt that very important marital things will happen. Divorce things will happen. There's no doubt about that. But we're teaching astrologers not to think. What really happens when Saturn goes into the seventh house is you start to attain a new persona publicly. It makes sense. You're going to go out and meet people, take your shingle down, put up a new one, maybe put up your first one. I've had so much education on this fact in the past couple of years. After 44 years, it took me a long time to learn it. But Saturn going through the seventh, I'm going to go meet people. I've got to be strong. I'm not just Aries self. I'm now self plus others. I might have a partner. I've got to deal with other people. That's what Libra is. I've got to deal with other people. I've got to learn to exchange with other people. That's where the connotation comes in of marriage, divorce, etc., etc. True marriage is the 8th sign. True marriage is the Scorpio house. That's the combining. 7th house, 7th sign, Libra is about bouncing ideas off the other. You will be surprised when you research Lennon and McCartney, Simon and Garfunkel, of which one was a Libra in each case. You will be surprised how well the Libra did in the partnership, even though they didn't really like their partner. Libra is bouncing ideas off of the other person. That's just what they're good at. They're really good at it. You get in a good conversation with a Libra, they're going to start doing backflips. They just love it. They just love the nature of arguing. They don't call it arguing. They call it discussing. Okay, but it is arguing. No one argues more than Libras. Okay. So a lot of things happen in Libra. You're learning to relate to others. You got a new persona out there with people. You're now taking the self on the road who's been cooking for 6 signs. Been cooking for 6 signs. Now it's ready to come out. So Saturn goes into the 7th. Very possible. I've seen people who, you remember Donnie. Donnie never wanted to get married. As soon as Saturn in his 7th house goes, he had to get married. Friend of ours. So it can really bug you to feel like I really need a permanent partner when it goes into the 7th. Okay, now, this is interesting. When Saturn goes into the 8th. When Saturn goes into the 8th. One time I was dealing with 2 ladies in my office, and I said to them, "Do you have a will?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Good." And I really didn't mean to say it. I said, no. You're not going to die. That's not what I mean. What I was trying to say to them, when Saturn gets in the 8th house, it's very, very common. Hold on one moment. Now, when Saturn goes into the 8th house, and as I've been telling you very strongly this past year or two, the 2nd house is the house of my worth, my self-worth. How do I feel about my self-worth? That's a big deal in astrology, because most people are not real healthy when it comes to self-worth. When planets bombard their 2nd house, they start to have a revolution. They start, don't mess with me anymore. And they start to strengthen their self-worth. When it's in the 8th house, what it does, and this is why I'm teaching you to think. When it's in the 8th house, what it does is it changes how I'm not going to let you affect my self-worth anymore. Erica, when I'm with you, we're going to talk and have all the times like we used to talk, but I'm not going to let you affect how I feel about myself anymore. That's the 8th house. This other people's money stuff is jive. Other people's money. It is other people's money. But more importantly, the whole zodiac is one big selfish place, which is about a self growing up. The whole zodiac is. So if I got a habit of being with Erica, and every time I come back from seeing her and I feel terrible about myself, I've got work to do. No, it doesn't even depend on what she's doing. It's up to me what I do. So that's the 8th house, the real 8th house. Now, when Saturn's there, it's very common that you redo your will. You start to write a diary about your life. your minutes, your story, whatever you want to call it, like John is doing, you start to think about what you're going to leave behind, what you're going to bequeath. It's very, very common. People redo their will when Saturn's in the 8th house. And another thing I've told people, do not mess with the IRS when Saturn's in your 8th house. Don't do it. Don't mess with an insurance company. Don't mess with any companies that are big and powerful, because they will get you. And they will get you. And I've seen it. Unless you're Trump, and then you can do anything you want at any time, and it won't matter. All right. Saturn goes up into the 9th house. Remember, that whole quadrant is about relationships. This is about relating to another person. This is about relating and getting married and deeply involved in the urge to merge, all the Scorpio passions. This is about going to college, going overseas. What do other governments think? What does everybody think politically? So you're on a broader scale of relationships. That's what the 9th house is about. You will see, when you see planets in the 9th house, you tell the person you're reading for what those two planets mean, and tell me it doesn't describe their college experience exactly. Saturn was in your 9th house. Oh, it got delayed. Oh, Uranus is in your 9th house. Oh, it was crazy. You went somewhere weird. Where'd you go? University of Samoa. These planets are, trust yourself more and more when you start to translate, to just pull out the basic nature of the planet and just express it. Because once you say it, the client will say, well, no, that's not quite it. And then they'll twist it a little bit. And then you get on to the real trail. Or they'll say, yeah. But very seldom will they say no. People think that they're so independent, they have no idea how much they're charged governing them. None. It's unbelievable. Okay. Now, Saturn gets to the 10th house. Now we got the fruition. We have now come full circle. 14. You ask people when they're at their career peak, what happened to them 14 years ago? And they'll say, oh, that's when I decided I wanted to become a nurse. Oh, you become a head of the nursing department now, huh? Now that it's on top. I told you, you got your new goal in mind. You're working towards it, okay? And when you're working towards this is very important. When you get your new goal in mind and you start to work hard at it, what happens in this quadrant is you start to peopleize it. You start to, the goal I want is through the eyes of meeting other people, other groups. And when I get to the top, it coalesces. Almost always, unless you really screwed up. And if you really screwed up, you're going to go to jail and it's going to be in the paper that day. Because that 10th house is very public. But this is usually promotions, advancements, things are going well, you're getting noticed, etc., etc. Things are going really well. You're culminating what was born back here. Now, I want to show you something that I came across years ago, was interesting, by Dane Rudger. He tells you in his book that if you got Saturn going through your 12th house and you don't dismantle properly, you don't, like the Indians will put closure to certain statuses, certain periods in their life, rites of passage. You kiss the old world goodbye, but you say, I appreciated you for 28 years. I rode that horse and I appreciated you. If you just throw it away and trash it, like many Americans do, if you don't bring closure to the 12th house properly, then you got a mess when Saturn goes through here. And you'll see this with people. If you don't bring closure properly, that as you rebuild, you usually can't rebuild or build the new structure, the new foundation properly. And then you got a mess because you ever try to build something on an improper foundation? And it just keeps on wobbling all the way up. So it's just a repetitive cycle after cycle after cycle. And usually all of us have 3 cycles in our lifetime. Saturn gets to the top, you get noticed, you get publicity, you get advancement, etc. And then the difference between the 10th and the 11th is very important. And I think it's very true too. These houses are always a higher octave of that. This is a higher octave of that. This is a higher octave of that. This is a higher octave of that. Now, what happens in the 10th house is I become a doctor and I'm populating a nice practice. It's coming along, making money, succeeding. And after it goes through the 10th house, I start to get a little bored with it because it's the same old, same old. Then the 11th house comes about, and the 11th house is very misunderstood and very much unappreciated. Then I want to join the American Medical Association. I want to work with groups that have to do with medicine. I want to work on a higher dimension. So you bring in the Aquarian aspect of the 11th house. That's what the difference in the 11th and the 10th is. And go into your chart and write down the years that you go around a circle, write down the years that Saturn went through these houses, and you'll be approximate within a year or so. Just get on some program and just track Saturn's path throughout your life or use your ephemeris. And you'll be just stunned at how you followed suit with these Saturn cycles and didn't even know it. Now, so Saturn goes to the 11th, and one of the things about the 11th, which is so prominent, is they talk about groups and associations, and that's really so true. But one of the things that's left in the dust, you never hear about hopes and wishes. Oh, it's a house of hopes and wishes. And, well, this isn't a lawn fate, you know? I'm not just at the fish pond here, like a little kid, hopes and wishes. The 11th house is big time hopes and wishes. It is your big time lifetime hopes and wishes. What do you really want to do? And it usually incorporates other people because it's in the 11th house, the Aquarian house. And a lot of times when you see Saturn hit that 11th house, you'll see options and you'll see opportunities come to people where they're all invited to become an officer of this club, or they're invited to get into this group at a higher dimension. So go do it to yourself. There's no reason for you to even come to this show unless you start doing things like that to your own chart, because only then does your chart come alive. And if you got somebody in the family that you do this to and it ain't working, then you start to question, why isn't it working? Number one, maybe the birth time's wrong. Number two, if the birth time's wrong, right, then something else is wrong. The person has a native difficulty utilizing Saturn energy. That can be, Arroyo teaches you this stuff. That can be because you had a father who was too strict, too careful. That can be parents that were too cautious. It can be a lot of reasons, but the Saturn is not operating in a healthy fashion. Now, then, just like we saw earlier, Saturn comes into the 12th house. And as soon as Saturn starts to leave the 11th and go into the 12th, you start to feel like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to retire. And even if you're young, this can happen when you're 26. You want to retire from the thing you've been doing, from the first cycle. You just don't want to do it anymore. You don't feel obligated to do it anymore. And that's when you need, like the American Indian, you need to look back at your past 25, 26 years and show appreciation for it and bring it to closure in a healthy, respectable way instead of just trashing it. Because your job in the 12th house is to become empty. And that scares Americans so bad because they don't understand that term. Eastern people, Eastern religious people understand it. Spiritual people understand it. It's time to become empty again. Not because your life is over, not because you're going to end up being nothing, but because your cycle's complete. It's time to end it and become empty so that you can refill. So the one thing you see in astrology, which is really, really common, astrology is not an art of circles. Astrology is an art of spirals. Continually learning about spiraling, 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 spiraling. The planets do not go around the sun. The planets spiral around. They spiral. Everything in the zodiac is like a spiral. So what Rudyard says, put the old life to bed properly, with respect, let it go. And see, this, so many people come to me when Saturn is in their 12th house because they don't understand. I was doing so well 5 years ago. I was on top of the world. I don't understand what's happened to me. And I just go, calm down. It's okay. This is a natural cycle. I say, you really don't want to be there anymore, do you? And they go, oh, really? See? Then you start to show them how they're really in sync with themselves. They don't even know it. So it's a really a blessing to me when I found out about this, because I don't think everybody knows about Saturn cycles the way Mark Robertson teaches them. So I was very grateful. So as I was telling you, to reiterate, in the birth chart, you let go, you become empty. You don't know what to do. You start to rebuild in the period of obscurity. You rebuild the self and the body, and you rebuild your money, and you rebuild your self-worth, and you rebuild your mind. And all of a sudden, bingo, you know what you want to do. The day, let me see if this is right. My ex-wife lost her parents when she was 17. The day Saturn hit, the day that Saturn hit the bottom of her chart, she says, I'm done moaning and bitching about this. The depression is over. I'm going back to school. 28 years later, the day Saturn hit this line again, on that day, she said, I want a divorce. So don't think that these are just happenstance. I don't care who's to blame in divorce or whatever. That's not the point. That's not the point. They're ends of cycles. They're ends of cycles. So as usually when Saturn gets here, there's the new cycle. There's the new direction. You start working. You start developing it. It gets stronger. This is really hard work during these 7-8 years. You go back and look when Saturn went through these signs, you'll see that your life was full of hard work. And then it's mixing with people, mixing with groups, learning to take your goal and peopleize it. Then you get to the top and you're on top again. You stay on top again, then it starts to fall apart again. Then you're empty. So that's the cycle of Saturn through your 12 houses. Now, Saturn, I told you, its other interesting parallel is how it's doing to itself. So if you're born with Saturn here, and Saturn comes over here, what do you think is going to happen? When Saturn, if you're born with Saturn here, and all of a sudden Saturn is here, yes, it's going to have to do with your hopes and wishes and your children. But when any planet is opposite another planet, or a planet is opposite itself, it's got a 7th house connotation. So Saturn opposes your Saturn. So for Marcia and I, we got Saturn at 14 of Libra. So we need to look and make note of what happened when Saturn was at 14 of Aries. It always has a relationship status because the 7th house, the opposing point is always 7th house in. Then when Saturn gets to the top, it's 10th house in. So squaring from the top, it's 10th house. When it's squaring from the bottom, it's 4th house. And then Saturn returns. Don't need to tell you about that, because that's a real critical time. When Saturn returns, it becomes, is my life working the way I want it to? Is my life practical? And a lot of people at age 28, how many people had big turning points at 28? I had to give up my job and go back to school, start all over. No more movie making, off to computer school, starting all over. Saturnian girlfriend says bye-bye and leaves me. Start all over. It's very common during a Saturn return. Oftentimes, Saturn returns are very, very good. It all depends on where it is. And what do you think? People who deal well with Saturn are your people that are practical. They're not hiding from stuff. They're responsible for themselves. The zodiac really likes it when you're responsible for yourself. The zodiac really does not like it when you try to hide from responsibility for yourself. It will kick your butt. Pluto, Aries, all of them. Uranus, I don't think I'm telling you anything new. Did any of you have anything unusual happen to you at age 28? It's almost like the fates itself take over. Linda, what happened? Turn your microphone on. Let's get Linda back here.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
Age
know,
28, what happened to you?
I had trouble finding a teaching job, and at 28, it just happened.
It just,
I got an interview, and they hired me right away. I mean, it was like the door just opened
real quickly.
and there was nothing. I mean, after that, it's just been, you know, fail. I mean, seriously, I didn't apply to graduate school to do the PhD, and they saved a place and called me and offered it to me. You know, I got my job that I have now. I mean, everything opened up from then. It was just clear sailing. So,
and when I got Saturn in the 9th house, and when I got Saturn return, I had to go back to school. When Saturn went into the 10th, I had my first computer job.
it's crazy.
Okay. This is one of those patterns, Miss Susan in Oregon. You're always asking me about certain patterns. This is about as certain as you're going to get with Saturn. Okay. What happened to everybody else when they're 28? Yeah,
They got
Erica.
married,
Erica, go ahead.
got married and
Got married.
went into business all at the same time because we were in business together.
That's very, very common. Now, what kind of business, may I ask?
A jewelry business, and we built it from scratch,
That's Saturn.
including the inside of the store, literally speaking, and started working on our house at the same time, renovating it when we weren't working on the store.
Now, you take your chart and take a pencil and just walk around that chart and put down the years approximately that Saturn was there, and you'll get multiple dates, and you'll start to see this whole pattern just keeps repeating, because we all walk around with this. Wonder what got into Claudia. I wonder what got into John. And what got into us is these Saturn and other bodies hit these places that cause different archetypal vibrations inside of us that we call feelings. Oh, I don't know why, just felt like doing it.
I got
Yes, Susan.
I got my second marriage when I was in 1970. It was
So
a-
you were 28 when you went into your second marriage?
Yeah. Yep.
That'll do it. Yep, that'll do it. Yes, Susan.
First marriage was a train
My
wreck.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's finish with John first. Go ahead.
My first marriage was a train wreck, and I don't have all the dates for that, or my first wife's.
You don't have the dates of your train wreck.
I'll figure it out.
That's okay. It's all right. You are all learning. Yes, go ahead, Susan.
So my Saturn return didn't happen until I was 30.
Well, usually 29, 30.
Okay, so at 30, I went from, lower college education to a state college, from like a junior college to a state, and I
Uh-huh.
picked my career. But then that Saturn return happened in the 9th house.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So that makes sense. So that
It
was a
makes a lot
decision
of sense. Yeah.
of where to study.
Yes, it does. What's weird is when you get two planets at once, like Saturn and Uranus are squaring each other at the time of your Saturn return. Then it gets really complex. Marcia, did you have something you wanted to say about 28?
Yes, I started working professionally in the theater.
And didn't you stay there about 30 years?
About 35 years.
Okay, so you went beyond 30. Okay, well, let me ask you this. You went beyond 30 years and you were doing massage also while you were in the theater.
Yeah.
What happened 35 years? What happened to you in your theater career when you're around 28? 28th year of it.
The 28th year of my theater career.
Right. What you will find is the 28th year of a marriage or a job, you have a natural perforation. In other words, you can leave if you want to with no problem. You can leave if you want to, or you can stay there. But usually when people go beyond the 28, I like to inquire what happened during those 7 years. Why did you stay the 7 years extra?
Putting my daughter through college.
Okay. All right. Now you'll find, like, for example, some people want to get divorced at 25, 26, and they just can't do it. And at 28, all of a sudden it just turns out that they can, and it ends up a friendly divorce. What's worse is the ones that have been married 30 years, 32 years, and they really wanted to get divorced at 28 and they didn't. Whew, then you got problems. Then you got one fighter in one corner and the other fighter in the other corner, and never the twain will they meet, and it can get ugly. The Saturn returns are very, very critical energies. Okay, very good. Anybody else have uniqueness at 28? Saturn went around a second time for me, age 57, open heart surgery.
Hmm.
Got my butt.
What house was your Saturn?
I was 57 at that time. Mine is in the 9th house, but I wasn't taking care of myself, and it caught up with me. So the second Saturn return can be very, very significant. In other words,
That return was retirement. Well, it was 1 year before retirement.
that's very
Yeah.
common. Now, I'll tell you, your health is better off when you're 60, 61, 62 than it is when you're 58.
Huh.
Got nothing to do with the year. It's got to do with where is Saturn compared to where was Saturn. Which is why we're having such issues in this country with Pluto coming back to where Pluto was.
Right.
That's just no picnic. You can't even imagine astrologically how stressful of a time it is right now. And what does Pluto bank on? What does Pluto bank on? How accurate you have stuck with your mission statement. Same with all entities, Republican Party, Democratic Party, USA, whatever it is.
So in 2001, Saturn was coming around almost to hit my moon. It
Okay.
was a few months away. And at the same time, Pluto was conjunct my sun.
Oh boy.
That was a divorce.
Okay, and why? With one on your moon and with one on your Saturn, and you're a Sag, which means, Sag, I don't really want to deal with this ugly stuff. But with Saturn on your moon and Pluto on your sun, all of a sudden it's like, I cannot breathe. I cannot go forward until this is resolved.
Right.
Now, as soon as you made the decision to resolve it, boom, everything starts working.
Yes, but 6 months later, when Saturn lined up with my moon, deep depression hit.
Of course it can be. Sure it can. Sure it can. For many, many reasons. Sure
And
it
that
can.
was in the 5th house. So I'm assuming
Yeah,
it's
and that-
titled all play, all creativity and play.
Well, in that case, I don't think the house matters as much as just hitting the moon. But see, that's what we're always doing as astrologers. You've seen on the last 6 years, is we are combining all these archetypal energies. I've been in, today's my anniversary. I've been in Pittsburgh 19 years today.
Wow.
I came with nothing. I walked into a bookstore and I said, let me read your chart. He said, I think you'll find that I do pretty well. And that was the beginning of it. That was 19 years ago. So I've been very lucky.
The anniversary of your career, you mean?
No, my
Or
career
moving to Pittsburgh?
was 81. Moving to
Yeah.
Pittsburgh was
19 years.
83. 03, I'm sorry. 03. Yes, Dr. John with his finger in the air.
I'm trying to figure this out and I can't. I have Saturn in the 11th house in Gemini with 4 other planets, and it's trined with Pluto and Iris. I mean, Iris. So
Hold on a moment. Okay, we're going to look at your chart with the planets on the outside. Okay, John, there's your chart in the middle. Now, on the outside, we're going to put whatever year you want. So what are you looking at on comparative date?
I was just looking at my birth chart. So
okay, your birth chart, your Saturn return, is that what you're looking for?
no, I was looking for the placement on my birth chart and the significance.
Okay, well, there's the birth chart, and Saturn was there when you were 28, 29, and then about age 30, you're back to, you see how it worked for you? Watch this. March 1972. So everybody's different. Okay, so you see in 1972, you had just had your Saturn return in 71. You have Saturn go over your sun, and then all of a sudden, Saturn goes into your 12th house. So you're coming together and falling apart at the same time. So you're coming together with the Saturn return, with Saturn on the sun, but Saturn goes into your 12th house and your whole life's falling apart. But that doesn't have to be falling apart. That can be falling apart in a healthy way, because Saturn goes through the 12th house and it gets to here. And now we're talking about 75, 76, you're empty. The Saturn has finished the 12 houses. It's starting up again. And then we see Saturn get down, and you have a elongated quadrant here. No, a shortened quadrant. So we see about there, about 82, Saturn at the bottom of your chart. That should be when you saw your new goal, which was Aries related. So your new goal was to be headstrong and go in a certain pioneering direction. And you saw that it was going to peak itself 14 years later. So you start working, and Saturn gets to the top around 97. Now you're on top of the goal that you initiated when Saturn was down at the bottom. Does that make sense?
Sort of, yeah.
Well,
Lots to
it's,
put together.
take your time with it, do it slowly, move the planets back and forth, and you'll start to see how it works for just about everybody. Sometimes there are other planets involved that get things confusing. But the pattern is a very natural pattern. That's why it works. Works with things, with plants, people, dogs, whatever.
Hey, Rick,
Yes, ma'am.
sometimes I get a little concerned because I had a really tough Saturn return. And this may make no sense. I may not know what I'm talking about here. So I'm thinking about my second Saturn return. So I guess the question is there a correlation between your first Saturn return and your second Saturn return?
Yeah,
Because
there definitely is, but I have every reason to believe from knowing you and hearing your stories that when you were in your earlier years, you were not doing very well taking care of you.
correct,
And now you are.
correct.
There's every reason to believe that your second Saturn return can be just fine.
Yeah,
It can be just fine. I told you when I started with a woman in 71, and she told me my Saturn returns were going to be hell,
mm-hmm.
and she was wrong. So you can't put that fear of God in people. So you have to take. If I didn't know you, I would be questioning. But since I know your history of picking things up again, taking care of yourself, getting over some very tough situations as an individual, and really coming out pretty victorious. So I think you have every reason to look at your second Saturn return as very, very successful.
Well, thanks. That's encouraging.
It should be. I'll get to you, Susan. Hold on. That make sense?
Yes, totally.
So you have to always take into account, like I say, you want to take the boat to Hawaii. Well, what's happened the last 9 times you took the boat out? You sunk it. Oh, you ain't going to Hawaii tomorrow.
Yeah.
The last 9 times you had a wonderful sailing trip, and you'll probably go to Hawaii. So you have to base it on the background. One more question. Yes, Susan.
So would her Saturn return the second time be thematically related to her first Saturn return?
It can be. It can be. You have to look real deeply in the chart. They're hard questions. Usually it's not, because while Saturn is returning, everything else is in a different place.
Right, okay.
Usually.
So it's not like the opening of something and the closing of it necessarily.
Well, sometimes when you have a Saturn return and you have the second one, it can definitely be what you just said, yes. It can be the closing of that cycle. But
Okay,
usually, see, Saturn returns go on, they go on a lot longer than you think. They're happening years before the Saturn return has formed and go on years afterward. So I think that in one way, for her first Saturn return, she was too hot to handle in her own mind. She couldn't handle her own stuff. It was just too much stuff for
That's
whatever
exactly
reason. And then by the
Yes.
time the second one came around, she said, "Oh no, I'm not playing that game now."
right.
Yeah. So let's all clap for Claudia. Okay, everybody, I'm tired.
It's all clap for Rick. Thank you for that. That
Yeah.
was so good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I'm
Rick.
glad you like. I hope you learned from it.
Very good.
Please do not stop. Get a pencil out, print out your chart, and go around. And even if you have questions, bring it to me next week and say, "How come Saturn was right there and nothing happened?"
Yeah,
You know,
Okay.
that's really how you learn.
Yeah.
You know, I have so many. How do I put this? I've seen people, their mom and dad died, and the daughter's chart is just torn up. The son's chart could care less. The son's chart, there's no aspect. And then you
Right.
find out the son didn't care. So
Yeah.
it's a mess. I
Yeah.
think I'll quit doing astrology because it's just too damn complicated. Been too long, it's too complicated. Linda's going to take over for me.
No.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
night.
Shelby says, have a good
Everyone.
week.
You too.
Yeah.